I died in the backseat of a black car on a rainy Tuesday. Not in blood. Not in fire. But in silence. The kind of silence that follows betrayal so thick, even your heartbeat refuses to echo anymore. Outside, the city blurred past like it was trying to escape the shame of witnessing my final humiliation. Inside, my fingers trembled around the velvet box I never got to open. He chose her again. After everything. After all I had given up. After all we had survived. He chose Karina again. My rich, cruel golden cousin with champagne eyes and a soul made of currency. And I was the discarded violin left in the corner of a room after the orchestra packs up. I wasn't even worth a proper goodbye. My name is Isla. And this is not a love story. This is a rebirth. A retaliation. A record of everything they thought I would never recover from. Because while they toasted to my downfall in penthouses built on nepotism, the universe gave me something better than closure. It gave me time. Time rewound. And this time I wasn't coming back to plead. I was coming back to own everything they once used to define me. When I opened my eyes again, I was 17. Same dorm room. Same uniform. Same cheap calendar with the wrong holidays circled in red. I blinked at the ceiling, waiting for the cruel punchline. But it never came. I sat up, nearly crying from the ache of muscle memory. My hands touched my chest, then the ends of my hair. Still short. Still dyed the color Kian once said made me look like an artist trying too hard. I looked into the mirror. Same girl. But inside, a storm newly loaded. Kian, the boy I loved for 4 years. The man who used me for 4 more. He was charming. Ambitious. Poor just like me. Or so I thought. I built him. From internships to job offers. From soft-spoken to boardroom savage. And then he left me. For her. Karina. My cousin. My rival since birth. Pretty. Wealthy. Connected. She didn't work a day in her life. But she knew how to own people like purses. And Kian? He was the latest accessory. In my last life I tried to win him back. Tried to become someone he'd regret leaving. Worked 3 jobs. Skipped meals. Built his father's resume from scratch to get him rehired at Lexington Corp. And when Kian stood beside Karina at that engagement party and didn't even look my way, I died. Not literally. But the kind of death that makes your soul refuse to sign up for another round. Except this time, the universe hit replay. And I was no longer playing defense. I was about to go corporate. I skipped homeroom the next morning. Instead, I walked to the administrative office and requested early graduation prep. They laughed. Most students don't plan that far ahead. I smiled politely. I'm not most students. They approved it. By noon, I'd signed up for business courses, mock interviews, and night shifts at the Student Tech Hub. Because Kian got his first opportunity through me. And Karina stole his heart with wealth. This time, I was becoming the woman neither of them could touch. 'Cause I wouldn't be in their world. I'd own it. I avoided Kian like he carried the plague of my last heartbreak. He was still the same. Too polite. Too eager. Too easy to impress with a compliment from someone wearing silk. I smiled when he passed me. Cool. Detached. He didn't recognize the fire behind my eyes yet. But he would. That night I made a list. Top 3 targets. Karina, for every dig she dressed as a compliment. Kian, for using my ambition to build his staircase. Lexington Corp, for firing his father in my last life, and burying my references after I spoke up. They thought I was small. They were wrong. I wasn't small. I was loading. I spent every free hour in the library. Not reading fiction. Reading board meeting transcripts. Company reports. Legacy business failures. I learned the structure of Lexington's entire operations. The secret subsidiaries. The corporate debts. The hidden liabilities they never taught in class. And when I found out they were vulnerable to hostile takeovers within 7 years, I underlined that date. Because in my last life I tried to get hired there. This time, I was going to buy them. Kian cornered me one afternoon outside the cafeteria. Isla, you've been distant. I tilted my head. Have I? He frowned. I just mean we used to talk. In a past life, I whispered. What? I smiled. Nothing. Just practicing letting go. He looked shaken. Good. Let him feel what I felt. For once. Karina entered the frame a few days later. Strutting through school with new heels and old jealousy. She found me studying and said, "Wow, still trying to impress teachers?" I closed my book. "No. Just preparing to run companies your trust fund will someday beg to invest in." She laughed. But her eyes twitched. And that was when I knew. She saw the shift. She felt the threat. I was no longer the poor cousin with secondhand shoes. I was a risk. A variable she couldn't predict. The day I landed my first internship, I sent an anonymous email to Kian. "You're still building resumes. I'm building empires. Keep up." I knew he'd guess it was me. And I knew he'd hate that I didn't need him anymore. But that was the point. I wasn't rewriting the past. I was demolishing it. So nothing that hurt me once could ever touch me again. One night I stood in front of my dorm mirror. No makeup. No performance. Just me. And I said out loud, "You are not a sob story. You are the storm they never saw coming." And then I smiled. Because this wasn't the beginning. This was the strike before the thunder. Rebirth didn't come with instructions. There were no signs pointing to vengeance. No magical guidebook teaching you how to rise from your own ashes. There was only instinct. And mine? It screamed build first. Burn later. So that's what I did. Brick by calculated brick. The first step was building credibility. Not in the classroom. In the real world. So I turned my student job into a gateway. At the University Tech Hub, most students just rebooted laptops or handed out extension cords. I rewired the entire student logbook system during my lunch breaks. The supervisor, a kind man named Rick, noticed. "You're scarily efficient," he said one day. "I have things to prove." He blinked. Not to me. I paused. Then smiled. That's the point. Soon Rick recommended me for a side gig. His friend worked at a small startup struggling with back-end systems. I spent 2 weekends fixing what their last IT lead had wrecked in 6 months. By Monday, they offered me a permanent remote position. Paid triple my campus job. First check. I didn't buy shoes. I bought domain names. ilaconsulting.co. strategiesgeometry.net. Not because I needed them yet, but because I knew I would. Soon. Meanwhile, I played the long game with Kian. He was still the golden boy of the econ department. Still charming enough to get professors to smile. Still needy enough to be visibly shaken when I didn't wave back. He cornered me again between classes. "Isla, can we talk?" I pretended to check my watch. Briefly. I miss how we used to bounce ideas off each other. I blinked. "Oh, you mean when I built your scholarship pitch and you took the credit?" He flushed. "That's not fair." "You're right," I said calmly. "I didn't ask for credit. I just didn't expect betrayal." He stammered. "I didn't betray you." "No." I leaned in, voice low. "Then whose hand were you holding at Karina's winter party, while I stood outside with frost in my hair and loyalty in my hands?" He had no answer. So I gave him one. "Thanks for the warning," I whispered. "Next time I offer someone wings, I'll check if they already belong to someone else's cage." And then I walked away. He didn't follow. Not because he didn't want to, but because he couldn't anymore. That version of me? Gone. Buried with the heartbreak. Replaced by something dangerous. Karina, of course, wasn't idle. She was the kind of girl who sensed power shifts before they hit the air. She showed up to my startup's office one afternoon in oversized sunglasses and a curated pout. "I heard you're doing tech work now. That's cute." I smiled. "I heard you're still asking your stylist for intimidating. And ending up with rich babysitter." She stiffened. "You've changed." "Not really," I said. "I just stopped pretending I wanted your approval." She laughed, but it cracked around the edges. And that's when I knew. Even Karina, with her wealth, her parties, her blood-soaked diamonds, was afraid of a woman with purpose. Because you can't steal from someone who no longer needs anything. A year passed. I graduated 6 months early. With honors. With 2 job offers. And one offer I created myself. A silent investor in my startup wanted to go full-time. Said he saw leadership in me. I told him I wasn't ready. Because I wasn't interested in being in a company. I wanted to own one. Specifically, Lexington Corp. Still bloated. Still old money. Still refusing innovation like it was contagious. But I had been watching them. Quietly. They were bleeding cash on unnecessary mergers. Firing mid-tier execs. Cutting pensions. Desperate moves by a company pretending to stay relevant. Perfect. I made a plan. 5 years. Buy a controlling share. Restructure the board. Fire the very people who thought they were untouchable. It wasn't personal. It was mathematical. But the bonus? Kian's father, the same man who got fired and blamed it on me in my last life, was still a mid-level manager here. This time I wouldn't save him. I'd own his title. And I'd do it without breaking a sweat. Daniel, my co-founder, watched me sketch the entire acquisition roadmap on our whiteboard one evening. You know this is insane, right? He said. I smiled. The best kind of insane. You're really going to try to take over Lexington? Not try. Succeed. He shook his head. What did they do to you? I erased a line, rewrote it bolder. They underestimated me. Meanwhile, Kian reached out again. This time by email. Hey, I've been thinking about our old conversations. I miss building with you. I'd love to reconnect, even as friends. Let me know. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't have words. Because some silences are the message. Then came the party. Karina's annual networking gala. $1,000 ticket. Open bar. Fake accents. Real cruelty. I wasn't invited. So I showed up as the +1 of a rising tech investor I'd casually mentored last year. I wore red. The same shade Karina once said made me look too ethnic. I wore it like armor. She saw me across the room and froze. You came. I sipped my champagne. Apparently, ambition travels faster than bloodlines. You're not welcome here. Then why is everyone asking for my card? She glared. I leaned closer. This isn't your world anymore, Karina. It's mine. You just haven't figured it out yet. Later that night, I found Kian near the balcony. Alone. Tired. He turned startled. Isla. I know what you want, I said calmly. He swallowed. And you want back in, I said. But not with me. With your own dignity. He looked ashamed. I never stopped caring. I smiled. But I stopped needing you to. And I walked away.
No bitterness. No breakdown.
Just evolution. Because he was never the story. He was just the footnote I outgrew. A month later, Lexington made headlines. Leaked reports showed multiple accounting failures. Their stock dipped. Board members resigned. And me? I called my silent investor. Let's move. He didn't hesitate. Because by now, even he knew. I wasn't building for revenge. I was building a throne. One whose legs were made of every time they told me no. And I was almost ready to sit. There's a different kind of power in silence. The kind that watches boardrooms fall without raising its voice. That's what I had become. Not loud. Not viral. Just inevitable. After the Lexington scandal broke, I didn't post anything. Didn't call Kian. Didn't gloat. I simply opened my laptop and read every public shareholder report. They were drowning. Cutting costs. Blaming tech. Blaming market fatigue. But I knew better. They were collapsing under the weight of arrogance. The same arrogance that made them think people like me would never get this far. My investor, Reza, called me on a Thursday morning. We're ready, he said. I have the boardroom meeting scheduled in 2 weeks. You'll have to face them. I leaned back. I'm not just facing them. I'm dethroning them. I walked into that Lexington boardroom wearing the same shoes I wore to Karina's gala. Red velvet heels. Unapologetic. Loud. Let them hear me before I spoke. There were 7 men at the table. All gray hair, designer watches, and fragile egos. One of them raised an eyebrow. You're Isla. I smiled. The Isla, I said. The one your sons probably follow on LinkedIn now. They chuckled, nervous, territorial. Do you know how aggressive your offer is? I opened my folder. Yes. That's why it worked. Within 15 minutes, I had flipped 2 swing votes. By 30, they knew resistance was wasteful. Reza sat beside me, silent, observant. I did all the talking. Not because I needed the power play, but because I'd earned it. These were the same people who blacklisted my name in my first life. called me unpolished, said I lacked executive presence. Now they were calling me ma'am, and I hadn't even signed yet. The final moment was quiet. A contract. A pen. A line that once belonged to men who called me disposable. I signed it slowly, one letter at a time.
AYL.
Then slid the folder back across the table. Congratulations, one man muttered. I stood. No, I said. Congratulations to the interns you used to ignore. To the assistants you never learned the names of. To the daughters you kept out of the succession plan. And then I walked out. Lexington was mine. Not in name. In blood. The next day I changed everything. Rebranded the entire digital division. Fired 3 toxic managers, including Kian's father, and replaced them with sharp, hungry minds that looked like me. Young, female, unbothered. Kian called me that week. He didn't say hello. Just, you fired my dad. I paused. No, I said. Your dad fired himself when he spent 10 years managing down and kissing up. He was quiet. You didn't even call. I'm not in the business of warning people who once watched me drown. Click. He hung up. And I felt nothing. Not pride. Not guilt. Just peace. Because that conversation should have happened in my first life. Now it was just a postscript. Karina took longer to react. She posted a snide congratulations on her story. Black font.
No tag.
With a wine glass emoji. And then she texted me. Lexington suits you. Almost makes up for that charity dress you wore sophomore year. I laughed out loud. She was cracking. Slowly. Beautifully. Because for people like Karina, power wasn't about money. It was about control. And I had just taken hers. Without breaking a nail. I hosted my first Lexington leadership dinner 1 month later. No black tie nonsense. No piano music. Just sharp minds, bold women, and founders under 30. The room pulsed with ambition. And when I stood to give my speech, I didn't thank anyone. Not my mentors. Not the board. Not the system. I said, some of us weren't born into the room, so we built our own doors. And then we made sure the locks were on our side. The applause lasted a full minute. But what echoed louder? The look on Karina's face when she saw it go viral the next day. That week I made a list of names. Women who had been overlooked. Engineers who had been dismissed. Single moms who coded between night shifts. I hired them all. Started a scholarship under my mother's maiden name. The one Karina's family always mocked as too provincial. It was petty. It was perfect. Kian showed up in the lobby 2 weeks later. Unannounced. He waited 3 hours. I let him. When I finally came down, he stood too fast. You look powerful. I am. I've been thinking. That was your first mistake. I cut in. He blinked. I miss when we were building something together. I stepped closer. Kian, I was the something. You just didn't see it. He swallowed. I made a mistake. I made a legacy. He tried to touch my hand. I stepped back. You chose her. Again. Remember. He looked away. I was scared. I smiled. I was scared too. And I still chose me. That's the difference. I walked away. This time I didn't look back. Because closure is for people who still wonder. And me? I didn't wonder anymore. I knew. Later that night, Daniel and I sat on the rooftop of my new place. Skyline glowing. City humming. He passed me a glass of something sweet. To Lexington? He asked. I shook my head. To what? I raised my glass. To girls who get tired of waiting to be chosen. And choose themselves instead. He clinked my glass. And for the first time in both my lives, I felt like I wasn't just surviving. I was writing the rules. The more successful I became, the quieter they got. Karina, Kian, their allies. Silence wasn't absence. It was calculation. They were watching, waiting, looking for cracks in the empire they never expected me to build. But I wasn't just building anymore. I was expanding. And the woman I was now, she didn't break. She broke markets. Lexington's revival was all over the press. Under Isla Rahim's leadership, the company posted its first profit margin in 5 years. From intern to CEO, how Isla restructured a legacy firm in under 12 months. Lexington 2.0, what happens when the future wears heels and doesn't flinch? They called it impressive. I called it overdue. Because I wasn't here to impress anyone. I was here to reclaim everything they once denied me, and make it so no girl after me would have to ask permission. My next move? Acquisitions. I bought out a small but rising firm called Ocelot Dynamics. It was one of Kian's early consulting gigs. The company Karina used to brag about funding, just to give him purpose. I didn't announce the buy publicly, called a meeting, and walked in unannounced while Kian was leading a pitch. He froze mid-sentence when he saw me. Karina was seated in the corner, legs crossed, expression unreadable. Don't stop, I said sweetly. I want to hear what you've built on my foundation. He stuttered. Karina recovered first. So the rumors are true. You bought us. I turned to her.
No.
I bought the company. You two just came as clearance items. The room went silent. Someone choked on their coffee. I dropped a folder on the table. New leadership guidelines. Effective immediately. Kian reached for it. I placed my hand on top.
No, Kian.
You don't get to lead what you couldn't even keep. I didn't fire them that day. I let them sweat. Let them twist. Let them report to new leads who didn't care about bloodlines or bedroom politics. Karina wasn't used to answering to anyone. Kian wasn't used to being watched. Now, they were both under my microscope. And the view was delicious. Later that week, Karina stormed into my office. You humiliated me. I looked up from my desk.
No.
You humiliated yourself. I just turned on the lights. She fumed. You always wanted to be me. I stood.
No.
I wanted what you had access to. Not your cruelty. Not your insecurities. Just the resources you wasted trying to be admired. She blinked. I walked around the desk. You got to the top because you were born in silk. I climbed here covered in ash. And still I shine brighter. She didn't speak after that. Just turned. And walked out. But not before I saw it. That flicker. That brief tremble of someone who just realized they're no longer the center of the story. And me? I wasn't a supporting role anymore. I was the author. At home I created a wall of wins. Not awards. Not press. Just letters. Emails from girls. Mothers. Employees. You gave me the courage to quit. My daughter watched your speech 3 times. I asked for a raise. I never would have dared before you. That was my real trophy case. Proof that power wasn't about being feared. It was about being followed. Daniel noticed the shift. You don't breathe like you used to, he said one night over takeout. How did I used to breathe? Like you were bracing. And now? Like you belong. I smiled. Because I do. My parents stayed quiet through most of my rise. They were conservative. Traditional. Afraid of attention. But one day a package arrived. A letter from my father.
No glitter.
No Hallmark font. Just 3 lines. We may not understand you, but we see you. And we're proud. I cried. Alone. Because sometimes validation doesn't come when you need it. But when it does come, it heals everything you didn't know was still bruised. Kian sent one last message. A letter. Handwritten. Asterisk you made it. Without me. And I guess that's what hurts the most. I thought you were a chapter. You turned out to be the whole book. Asterisk. I didn't reply. Not because I hated him, but because his story had ended in my life, long before I ever started writing this version of me. Karina was removed from the company 3 months later. She tried to start her own agency. It flopped within a quarter. She called it bad luck. I called it poetic. Because when your entire identity is built on other people's approval, you collapse the moment you're left alone in a room. And I built myself brick by brick.
No spotlight. No applause.
Just grit. And now that I was shining, I didn't need the world to clap. I made the world stop and listen. The funny thing about power? It always reveals the truth. It doesn't change people. It unmasks them. And now that I had the power, everyone around me stopped pretending. Especially Karina. Her fall was slow. Publicly, she kept the smile, the curated outfits, the perfect captions. But I knew her too well. Her staff was leaving. Investors were hesitating. She posted old photos and called them memories, hoping people wouldn't notice there was nothing new to show. And me? I didn't say a word. Because silence, when timed right, is the loudest revenge. Lexington soared under my leadership. New partnerships, tech integrations, a mentorship program that got national press. But what made headlines? The viral speech I gave at the International Women in Business Forum. I said, "Privilege is not power. Power is waking up every day and still choosing to build after the world tells you to settle." I wasn't born with a legacy. I created one. The clip was shared 3.2 million times. Even the people who once dismissed me had to look again. 'Cause I wasn't just someone now. I was the standard. Daniel and I remained steady. He didn't try to compete. Didn't get lost in my shadow. He knew he didn't need to shine brighter. He just needed to shine with me. One night, after a charity gala, he looked at me across the balcony and said, "You know what the scariest thing about you is?" I raised an eyebrow. "You're not afraid of losing anything anymore." And he was right. Because once you rebuild yourself from nothing, you stop fearing subtraction. Kin, still around, still watching. He joined a new firm. Lower position, less visibility. Every time someone mentioned me in the room, he shifted. But he never reached out again. I think he finally understood. My silence wasn't bitterness. It was boundaries. Then came the offer. A global firm. Massive. Old money. Global reach. They wanted to buy Lexington's rising tech division. Fold it under their umbrella. The numbers were outrageous. But I didn't flinch. Because I hadn't built Lexington just to cash out. I'd built it to prove that power in the right hands doesn't compromise. I declined. Instead, I announced my next move. Founding my own holding company. Not just to lead. To own. To shelter other founders who looked like me. Who the world said no to before even hearing them speak. I named it Raheem Equity. Because I was done hiding behind initials. Let them spell out the name that once sounded too foreign in boardrooms. Let them respect it. Karina called. First time in nearly a year. I answered. She didn't wait. "You win, Isla." I stayed silent. She sighed. I didn't think you'd last." "I know," I said. "I underestimated you. I counted on that." She laughed. Quiet. Bitter. Then, "Do you ever miss being family?" I paused. Family isn't blood. It's who roots for you when you're not winning. So no, I don't. Silence. Then she whispered, "I don't know how to fix anything anymore." I softened. Just a little. Then start by sitting with the mess. That's what I did. She didn't say goodbye. But I could hear the ending in her breath. The day Raheem Equity launched, I stood in front of a room of women. Brown. Black. Loud. Quiet. Fierce. All of them with stories like mine. Buried in resumes and forgotten in meetings. I told them, you don't need a seat at their table. You need your own damn table. With no glass ceilings above it. And no doors they can lock behind you. The applause didn't matter. What mattered was the tears. The nods. The fists clenched in hope. Because I wasn't just winning anymore. I was pulling people up with me. Daniel and I traveled that summer. Not for luxury. For peace. We sat under lanterns in Kyoto. We walked alleyways in Lisbon. We danced to no music in our kitchen in Rome. And one night, beneath a blanket of unfamiliar stars, he said, "I think I fell in love with you when you chose yourself." And I kissed him. Not because I needed the fairy tale ending, but because we were writing one that didn't require sacrifice. Just alignment. My mother visited. She walked through my new office. All glass and light and bookshelves stacked with strategy journals. She looked at me and said, "You always scared me a little." Why? Because I knew the world would try to crush you. And I wasn't sure you'd survive. I reached for her hand. I didn't. She looked confused. I smiled. I didn't survive. I transformed. And then I handed her a folder. Inside, documents for a trust. One that would pay forward to daughters born in silence. Because healing isn't just personal. It's ancestral. The press kept asking about my next move. A TED Talk? A book? Politics? I said no. Because my next move, was inward. More building. More mentoring. More undoing the damage others built into girls like me. And maybe, just maybe, a daughter of my own someday who wouldn't have to rise through fire to be heard. Who would grow up already knowing her worth. Not because she fought for it, but because it was never in question. Power changes your view of the world. Not because the world becomes softer, but because you finally stop needing its approval. That was where I stood now. Not above anyone. Just outside the cage they all tried to keep me in. And when you're no longer begging to be let in, you become unstoppable. Raheem Equity was more than a company. It was a shelter. A stage. A sword. I handpicked each partnership like a surgeon with a scalpel. No nepotism. No sweet-talking legacy hires. Just brilliance. Resilience. Women who had scars and stories and strategies. We launched 4 startups in the first quarter. 2 were founded by survivors of corporate sabotage. 1 by a refugee-turned-engineer. Another by a single mom who coded with one hand while rocking her baby with the other. They didn't have polished resumes. They had grit. And grit was currency now. Because I said so. The media started paying closer attention. Not just to me. To the pattern. How every woman I backed rose. How every investment turned a profit. How every voice I amplified echoed into entire industries. They asked, "What's your secret?" And I said, "Stop funding comfort. Start funding truth." They called it radical. Called it math. Because betting on overlooked talent wasn't emotional. It was efficient. Karina was quiet. Mostly. She rebranded herself as a style curator on social media. Her followers dropped. Sponsorships dried up. She messaged me once. "Your people won't always worship you. Enjoy the applause while it lasts." I didn't reply. Because I wasn't here for applause. I was building infrastructure. And applause doesn't build generational wealth. It just echoes. I was done echoing. I wanted impact. Kian reappeared again. Of course. It was a founders' summit in Chicago. I was speaking. He was attending. I walked into the green room and found him waiting. "Isla." I didn't flinch. "Kian. You look fulfilled." "I am." He paused. I wanted to say thank you. I raised an eyebrow. For what? For firing my father. For ignoring me. For rising. I stayed quiet. I watched every step. I deserved to be left behind. I tilted my head. "That's the first honest thing you've ever said." He smiled sadly. "And probably the last thing you'll hear from me." I nodded. "I hope so." And that was the end. Not just of us, but of the version of me that once waited on his approval like sunlight. I was my own son now. Raheem Equity broke into international markets. Africa, Asia, South America. Everywhere women were told they needed permission, we showed up with blueprints instead. The foundation funded over 300 scholarships. The youngest girl to receive one? 9. She sent me a hand-drawn picture of her playing a violin on a stage she titled Zio Concert. I cried when I saw it, because she didn't see a contradiction in that image. She saw power in every form, and that meant we were winning. Daniel and I got engaged quietly. No public announcement. No diamond photo shoot. Just a ring under moonlight and a promise whispered between 2 people who had nothing left to prove. "You don't complete me," I told him. "I never wanted to," he said. And that was why it worked. We weren't halves. We were whole on our own, but stronger together. At the next Women's Summit, I was asked to close with one message. I stood on stage, lights warm on my face, and said, "They said I was too intense, too smart, too brown, too much, and I believed them, until I became louder than their limits. Now, I invest in the girls who scare people like them. I don't teach them to be quiet. I teach them to own the room they were once told to shrink in. No standing ovation. Just a stillness that settled like thunder waiting to break. And that was enough." A year later, I was invited to speak at my old university. Full circle. The same halls where I was once invisible. The same classrooms where Kian borrowed my notes and Karina smirked at my shoes. Now, I was the keynote. They gave me an honorary doctorate. My mother cried in the front row. And after the ceremony, a girl stopped me in the hallway. Hijab wrapped tight. Eyes wide, voice trembling. She whispered, "I didn't think people like us could be you." I knelt. "You're not trying to be me." She blinked. "You're going to be more." And her smile shattered something in me. Something heavy. Something I hadn't realized I was still carrying. Later that night, Daniel and I stood at our balcony. He held my hand. I looked out at the skyline, the buildings I once stared at from library windows, thinking they were out of reach. Now they looked small. Or maybe I had grown too big to see them the same way. He asked, "What now?" And I said, "Now we teach. Now we pass the mic." He nodded. "Because this isn't the end," I added. "It's the beginning for everyone we're bringing with us." There's something poetic about returning to the places that once tried to erase you. Not to ask for entry, but to buy the land, rename the street, and turn the lights back on for the next girl walking in with fire in her chest and doubt in her pocket. That's what I did next. I bought the building, the one where I was once told, "You're not a culture fit." The same office where I was handed coffee orders instead of opportunity. I walked through those marble doors now as owner. Everyone stared. I didn't wave, didn't explain. I just placed the plaque outside. Rahim Equity West HQ. Founded by a girl they told to smile more. Let them read it. Let them remember. Let them know we don't just break ceilings anymore. We replace the whole damn roof. Daniel stood beside me during the ribbon cutting. Someone from the press asked, "What does this moment mean to you?" I looked straight at the cameras and said, "I was told I was too ambitious. Turns out they were too afraid." Our mentorship program tripled in size. We opened hubs in Cape Town, Seoul, Bogota. Women came with fire in their lungs and bruises on their resumes. I told each one, "You don't have to fix your tone. You have to own your voice." And they did. God, did they. Karina was a ghost by then, occasionally showing up in my feed. A passive comment here. A sponsored post there. She'd become the background noise of a life that had outpaced her. But one day she reached out. This time different.
No hubs.
No arrogance. Just, "I've lost everything. And I think I finally understand what you were fighting for." I stared at the message. Felt no joy.
No vengeance.
Only truth. So I wrote back. Asterisk, "I didn't fight to prove you wrong. I fought to make sure no one else had to learn the way I did, through fire." Asterisk. She never replied. But she left the app a week later. And that was her ending. Not a fall. Not a tragedy. Just irrelevance. Because when your entire identity depends on being better than someone else, you vanish the moment they stop needing to compete. I was asked to write a book. First I said no. Too busy. Too loud. But a young girl at one of my talks changed my mind. She said, "What if I never meet you again? I need your words somewhere I can keep them." So I wrote it. Not a memoir. A manifesto. Title built from no. Subhead. How to Rise When the World Keeps Calling You Too Much. It hit bestseller lists in 3 countries within 24 hours. But the best part? A photo someone sent me. A teenage girl reading it on the subway, tears in her eyes, whispering lines out loud. She was wearing a Lexington hoodie. And that was the legacy. Not wealth. Not charts. Impact. Daniel and I got married on a hilltop in Italy. 10 people. No media. I wore a pantsuit. He wore joy. During our vows, he said, "You were never waiting to be rescued. You just needed someone who wouldn't flinch when you stepped into your power." And I kissed him with everything I was. Not a bride. Not a CEO. Just a woman who had finally stopped shrinking to fit the frame. After the honeymoon, I launched a series of global workshops. Called them Unshrink. Sessions for girls 12 to 25. Business. Confidence. Safety. Self-worth. One line from the workbook became a tattoo trend. I am not a second draft. I am the original manuscript. And every time I saw one inked on a stranger's skin, I smiled. Because we were rewriting everything. One girl at a time. Kian faded. Last I heard, he left the country. Tried launching a startup in a city where no one knew his name. It didn't last. Not because he lacked skill, but because he'd never learned to build without stealing bricks from someone else's wall. Me? I was building entire cities now. And I had no time for ghosts. I returned to the house I grew up in, knocked on the door. My mother opened it. Eyes soft, voice careful. I saw the billboard. In Times Square. Did it make you proud? She pulled me into a hug. Terrified. Why? Because the world still punishes women like you. And I worry, you've risen too high to fall safely. I held her tighter. I'm not falling. I'm flying. And I built wings strong enough to catch others too. She wept. And I held her, knowing that sometimes healing doesn't come with closure, but with clarity. Later, I walked into my old bedroom. Posters still up. Books still stacked. The tiny desk where I used to map out futures no one believed in. And I sat, closed my eyes, let the silence settle. Then I whispered, I did it. Not for validation, but as a message to that younger version of me, who thought love was the reward for shrinking, and power was something to fear. That girl, she was gone. And in her place, stood a woman who wrote her own name at the top of every document she signed. I didn't dream small anymore. Not because I had everything, but because I had nothing left to lose. And when fear finally evacuates your life, what's left? Fire, purpose, and a quiet, undefeated kind of peace. That's what carried me into the next phase of my story. Rahim Equity became a movement. We expanded into education, launched an accelerator program called the First Name Club, for girls who wanted their names on buildings, not just resumes. Our tagline? You're not a future leader. You're a now one. The first class had 200 applicants, all of them under 25, all of them already dangerous in the best way. Ava was one of them, 21, ex-foster care. 3 failed businesses before she was old enough to rent a car. She walked into the interview and said, I don't want pity. I want strategy. I hired her on the spot. 6 months later, she scaled an app that got acquired for 6 figures. She called me crying. Does this mean I made it? I laughed. You made it the moment you walked in like you had nothing to prove. Because that's the new language of power. Not needing to scream. Just being undeniable. We opened another office. Not in Silicon Valley. Not in Manhattan. In a place no one expected. Detroit. A city like me once written off. Now rising. We hired locally. Trained across class. Promoted based on brilliance, not accent or background. It made headlines. But what mattered was the impact. A barista turned data analyst. A single dad who built our new logistics system. A 19-year-old girl who became the youngest director in our network's history. I saw myself in all of them. Not because we shared the same past, but because we all refused to repeat the one we were given. Daniel and I bought a house. Not a mansion. Not for the aesthetic. It had a garden. A library. A view of the sky unblocked by other people's expectations. He asked me once, do you ever miss being underestimated? I smiled. Sometimes. It made revenge taste sweeter. But now I just enjoy building. Because when the war ends, and you've won, you get to build peace on your own terms. Karina made one last move. She showed up at a panel I was hosting. I saw her in the crowd. Eyes hollow. Makeup perfect. Posture rehearsed. She waited until the Q&A. Took the mic. Cleared her throat. And said, how do you forgive people who aren't sorry? The room shifted. I met her eyes. And said simply, you don't forgive them for them. You forgive them so they don't get to stay in your story. They don't get the power of being a main character in your healing. The room exploded. She sat down slowly. That was our goodbye. Not with a scream. Not with a scene. But with a truth so sharp it left no wound. Just closure. I was named Most Influential Executive of the Year. They put me on the cover. Big white letters. Isla Rahim, built from no. I stared at the magazine for a long time. Not because I needed the validation, but because a little part of me, the one that used to cry in dorm showers after being called too much, she needed this. Just once. To know it wasn't all in vain. We opened a fund named Daughters Who Don't Wait. Scholarships. Seed money. Legal support. Because it wasn't enough to rise anymore. We had to drag others up with us. A girl from Karachi launched a biotech startup. A team from Lagos built a shipping AI. A trans woman from Sao Paulo raised her first round and sent me a thank you note that read, "You made me believe I was allowed to want more." And I cried. Because that's what legacy is. Not buildings. Permission. One night, I gave a private talk to a group of young women.
No cámaras.
No press. Just couches.
Warmte.
Raw honesty. I told them, don't build to be seen. Build so that when the next girl arrives, she doesn't have to ask if she belongs. One of them asked, "What would you say to the version of you who almost gave up?" I thought about it. Then whispered, "Thank you for holding on long enough to meet me." Sometimes I still get quiet. Still remember the version of me who bent too easily, who apologized too quickly, who loved people who only loved my usefulness. But now, I bless her. Because she's the one who crawled through the dirt so I could fly. And flying isn't lonely. Not when you're lifting others with you. Success doesn't always feel like fireworks. Sometimes it's quiet. Like breathing after years of suffocating. Sometimes it's standing in your own kitchen barefoot, coffee in hand, and realizing there's no one left to impress. Just yourself. And for the first time, that's enough. I took a break. A real one. 6 weeks.
No speeches. No screens. No headlines.
Just stillness. Daniel and I rented a cabin in the mountains. Woke up with sunlight. Went to sleep with laughter. I read books that had nothing to do with business. Cooked with ingredients I couldn't pronounce. Danced barefoot under string lights. It was the kind of peace I used to think was reserved for other people. Now, I knew I earned it. Because peace isn't something you're given. It's something you build. Right over the bones of the world that told you no. One morning while journaling, I wrote a sentence that stopped me. I don't have to be at war to be worthy. It hit me. I had spent so much of my life fighting, clawing, proving. But maybe the truest power is learning when to rest and letting the silence love you back. When I returned, I restructured my calendar. More mentorship, more strategy, less spotlight. Because I didn't want to be famous. I wanted to be effective. An impact doesn't always go viral. Sometimes it just whispers through lives you never even meet, changing them forever. Ava, my first mentee, became partner at her firm. She sent me a video, opening a new office, cutting the ribbon, wearing heels I once gifted her. She said to the camera, "When Isla told me I didn't need to tone it down to lead, I believed her. And now I make sure no one else has to either." That was the legacy. Not just leading, multiplying leadership. I created a new internal motto at Rahim Equity.
No shrinking. No begging.
No waiting. It wasn't just for branding. It was for me. For the younger version of me that once sat outside Karina's parties hoping someone would invite me in. For the girl who wrote Kian's essays while pretending it didn't hurt. For the woman who thought power meant being quiet enough to keep the peace. Now I knew. Peace isn't the absence of noise. It's the absence of permission seeking. A major publication offered to do a documentary. They wanted to trace my rise. The heartbreak. The betrayal. The rivalry. I declined. Because I wasn't a plot twist. I wasn't the bitter girl who got rich. I was the architect of a system that now included the very people once left outside. They didn't need my story sensationalized. They needed my playbook. So I wrote one. Not for profit. Free. Open source. A digital blueprint on how to create equitable hiring pipelines. Fund women without bias. Scale companies without ego. Leave behind institutions that don't evolve. It went viral in under 24 hours. People called it bold. I called it overdue. Because if I rose alone, I'd still be hungry. But if I taught others how to rise, I'd never be alone again. My parents retired peacefully. I bought them a seaside home. They grew herbs, hosted neighbors, told everyone their daughter worked with women or something very important. That was enough. They didn't need to know the details. They just needed to rest. And I made sure they could. Because no matter what we come from, we all deserve to end softer than we started. Karina messaged me again. Only this time it wasn't to take. It was to offer. If there's ever anything I can do for one of your girls, say the word. I sat with that. And responded. Start by listening to one without interrupting. Then hire her, even if she doesn't speak like you. Then believe in her when it's inconvenient. No reply. But a month later, one of my interns said she'd just been offered a job from someone named Karina. No questions.
No interviews.
Just a message that said, Isla speaks highly of you. That's all I need. And just like that, redemption, quietly, entered the room. Daniel and I hosted a dinner. Nothing fancy. Just friends. Past ments. New founders. At the table, someone asked me, if you could go back and undo the pain, would you? Everyone got quiet. I didn't. I said,
No.
because without it, I wouldn't have learned how to build doors instead of knock on them. And the truth is, even the pain was part of the blueprint. Not the foundation, but the fuel. That night, after everyone left, I walked onto the balcony. City lights blinking like applause I didn't need anymore. I whispered to the stars, I made it. Not because I was rich, not because I was known, but because I was free. And freedom is the most luxurious thing you can ever wear. The world didn't roll out a red carpet when I arrived. It didn't cheer, didn't welcome me, didn't hand me anything but silence and small doors that slammed shut when I knocked too loudly. So I stopped knocking, and I built my own house, my own hallway, my own keys. Now, the doors open before I even reach them. But the most beautiful thing? I don't walk in alone. It started with belief, not theirs. Mine. The belief that even after being used, betrayed, dismissed, I was still worth building around. That belief became my foundation, my blueprint, my weapon. They underestimated it. They always do. Because belief, when carried by a woman who remembers every no ever hurled at her, is unshakable. I opened a school. Not for grades. For grit. It was called the Unapologetic Academy.
No uniforms. No rigid curriculums.
No teaching girls to take up less space. We taught negotiation. We taught refusal. We taught how to say this isn't good enough without blinking. And every girl who walked out of those doors did so with her head a little higher, her voice a little louder, her dreams no longer prefaced with, if I'm lucky, because we replaced luck with structure, and dreams with plans. One day, a woman knocked on my office door. Worn coat, eyes tired, back straight. She said her daughter had gone through our scholarship program, and she just wanted to say thank you. I invited her in. She told me stories of nights when her daughter studied under streetlights, of how she hid coins under floorboards for her application fees, of the day she got accepted into our incubator and didn't stop crying for 3 hours. At the end, she said, I don't have much, but if you ever need someone to sweep these halls or fix a broken chair, I'm yours. I hugged her, and I said, you already fixed something. You raised a girl the world couldn't ignore. We created a grant in her daughter's name, because some legacies aren't earned in boardrooms. They're born in tiny kitchens, lit by hope, kept alive by women who refuse to give up, even when the world forgets their name. Ava got married. She asked me to walk her down the aisle. I hesitated. I'm not your parent. You are the reason I made it, she said. I stood beside her, trembling as the music played. But when she reached the altar, she turned to me and whispered, I hope I become someone else's Isla someday. And I cried through the whole ceremony, because nothing I ever built, no company, no speech, no fund, ever moved me more than that moment. It wasn't about me anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. I started writing letters to girls I hadn't met yet, sealed them in envelopes with dates in the future, to the girl who thinks no one sees her, to the one who just got betrayed, to the girl who's tired of being polite when she's hurting. I left them in bookstores, cafes, university dorm lobbies. Some were never opened. Some ended up online. One was turned into a mural in Morocco. The quote they used, your softness is not weakness. Your fire is not rage. Your voice is not too loud. They just never learned how to listen. Daniel and I celebrated our 5th anniversary in the same city where we met. He surprised me with a small dinner.
No speeches.
Just people I loved. After dessert, he stood up and raised a glass and said, I married a woman who never asked to be saved. She was too busy rewriting the maps that never included her. And now, we all live in her world. Everyone clapped. I kissed him softly and whispered, "Thank you for never making me smaller to make yourself feel bigger." He smiled. "You wouldn't have allowed it anyway." We laughed, because it was true. Years passed, and I never slowed down. But I did shift. More teaching, more writing, more resting. Not because I was tired, but because I wanted others to run now. I had paved the road, lit the signs, cleared the branches. Now it was their turn. One last story. I visited my childhood school. They asked me to speak to the graduating class. I looked out at those bright, burning faces, and I said, "If you ever feel like you're too loud, too complicated, too much, remember this. You were never the problem. They just hadn't expanded enough to hold someone like you yet. But you? You'll build what they couldn't even imagine." Silence. Then thunder. Not applause. Purpose. As I walked out, a girl ran up to me, shaking. She handed me a note. It said, "I was going to give up. Today was going to be my last try. Then I saw you. Now I'm going home to write my plan." She didn't sign her name. She didn't have to. I knew her. She was me. She was all of us. And I smiled, because the work was never really about me rising. It was about making sure no one else had to rise alone again.